Texas was kind of a confluence of a bunch of different things happening. It brought a lot of water in a short period of time.
So people all across Texas appeared to feel the ground shake tonight, not from the stars wind, but from a strong earthquake out in West Texas.
Cracks began to tear through the parched earth in the heart of Texas, slicing open the surface like invisible scars from deep within the planet. It was early morning when the first reports surfaced, fissures appearing seemingly overnight in a region previously undisturbed by such geological instability. Within hours, more cracks emerged, some stretching for dozens of feet, others swallowing up fence lines, roads, and parts of agricultural fields. What had started as an isolated anomaly quickly evolved into a statewide concern as the earth continued to fracture, creating anxiety across both rural and suburban areas. The Texas landscape, known for its dry plains and clay-rich soils, was now shifting underfoot, and geologists were scrambling to understand the cause behind the sudden disruption. Before we start, smash the like and subscribe buttons for more updates. By midday, the Geological survey teams had converged on several hotspots where the cracks appeared most aggressive. Satellite imaging and ground-based instruments began feeding back worrying data. The fissures were not superficial. These weren't simply surface-level expressions caused by drying soil or seasonal subsidence. The depth and alignment of the cracks indicated deeper structural movements suggestive of tectonic stress accumulating beneath the region. Given the speed and scale of the unfolding events, the U.S. Geological Service moved swiftly to issue a red alert, an urgent warning of impending geological hazard and the potential for worsening conditions. The declaration of a red alert in Texas was unprecedented. While the state had experienced minor earthquakes and land subsidence before, especially in oil-rich basins, this event stood out for both its rapid onset and unusual geography. Many of the cracks were forming in areas far from known fault lines or active fracking zones. The instability appeared to be radiating from a new zone, one that hadn't been mapped previously, suggesting either a reactivation of ancient fault systems or the emergence of a previously undetected subterranean threat. This uncertainty amplified public concern, not only about the immediate structural damages, but also about what it signaled for the broader geological stability of the region. As the cracks widened, engineers began recording shifts in nearby infrastructure. Roads buckled unexpectedly, and pipeline networks running beneath the ground showed alarming stress points. One of the most dramatic episodes occurred just outside Midland, where an entire section of asphalt had collapsed into a jagged crevasse. The sinkhole that formed revealed stratified earth layers displaced by several feet, a sign that something far more powerful than soil erosion was at play. Traffic was rerouted and drone surveillance was deployed to monitor other areas potentially at risk of similar failure. Geologists dove deeper into seismic data, comparing fresh readings to historical activity patterns across the state. What they uncovered only deepened the mystery. Microseismic tremors had been intensifying in the weeks prior to the emergence of the cracks. These tremors were too subtle to be felt by humans, but they had been humming through the underground crust like a warning bell. Distributed across a wide swath of central and western Texas, the tremors hinted at shifting subterranean forces, potentially caused by an expanding fault system or shifting crustal plates. Some experts speculated that pressures previously locked deep beneath the Texas craton might be adjusting in response to faraway tectonic activity, possibly even tied to deeper mantle dynamics beneath the continent. Adding to the intrigue was the sudden increase in gas emissions in some of the affected zones. Field teams reported localized spikes in radon levels, a radioactive gas that tends to seep from fractured rock. In more alarming instances, there were short-lived surges of methane detected at the surface, which pointed to the disruption of deeper geological layers where organic materials had long been buried. While these emissions did not reach hazardous concentrations, their presence was a sign that deep earth layers were being disturbed, layers that normally remain sealed from the surface for millennia. The cracking also began to encroach upon regions dense with oil and gas infrastructure. In the Permian Basin, home to one of the largest concentrations of energy extraction in the United States, companies started to suspend operations near affected areas, not out of panic, but out of an abundance of caution. Any ground instability posed a risk to drilling wells and storage tanks, and even minor shifts in subsurface geology could jeopardize the integrity of casings and pipelines. Some companies began deploying ground-penetrating radar and portable seismographs, hoping to gather their own data and understand the unfolding risks to their multi-billion-dollar infrastructure. While the Permian Basin drew much of the attention, similar crack patterns began to appear in surprising locations: farmlands to the east, suburbs on the outskirts of San Antonio, and even natural preserves known for their karst topography. In those regions, the cracking phenomenon took on an eerie aesthetic, snaking through forests and fields in jagged, seemingly arbitrary lines. But geologists noted a consistent orientation among many of the fissures, suggesting a directional stress pattern running from southwest to northeast. This finding pointed again toward a broad tectonic force at play, one that might be reorganizing the state's geological fabric. Urban planners and civil engineers found themselves facing difficult questions. Texas is not historically considered a high-risk zone for earthquakes or major land deformation, and much of its infrastructure was built with minimal seismic precautions. Bridges, overpasses, and elevated roadways in particular were now being evaluated for susceptibility to ground movement. Even foundational slabs of homes, many of which rest on expansive clays sensitive to moisture, were beginning to show signs of warping in the vicinity of the cracks. In newer developments, homeowners reported sudden shifts in their walls and ceilings, cracks appearing overnight along load-bearing structures, and the unsettling creaks of stressed beams. The broader implications of these developments struck a nerve beyond geology and engineering. Insurance companies were inundated with claims and questions, unsure of how to categorize the emerging damage. Was this a case of natural subsidence, or something more akin to an earthquake? The answer mattered for coverage policies and risk assessments. Meanwhile, emergency services in several counties began training for worst-case scenarios, including large-scale evacuations should more dramatic ground collapses occur. For now, the response remained precautionary, but the sense of urgency in official circles was unmistakable. Environmental scientists also raised concerns. If the geological activity continued to expand, it could have implications for aquifers and underground water systems that provide crucial resources across the state. Shifts in the subsurface layers could fracture aquifer boundaries, alter flow patterns, or even introduce contaminants from deep mineral layers. Already, some monitoring wells showed unusual readings in water quality and pressure. These changes weren't yet dangerous, but they hinted at the fragile balance that exists beneath the ground, and how easily it can be disrupted by forces we barely understand. Amidst the scientific investigation and civil response, communities nearest the epicenters of cracking lived in a state of heightened anxiety. Families watched the soil around their homes shift and heave. In some cases, barns and sheds collapsed as their foundations were pulled apart. The uncertainty weighed heavily. Would the cracks stabilize or worsen? Were they signs of a temporary stress release, or a precursor to more violent earth movements yet to come? Speculation ran rampant, fueled by social media videos showing earth cracking open in real time and residents poking sticks into fissures that seemingly had no bottom. The visuals were striking and deeply unsettling, showing how quickly stable ground could become compromised. Some users online began circulating maps of ancient fault lines, linking them to current crack locations in an attempt to understand the pattern. Others recalled previous warnings from scientists who had predicted increased geological activity due to groundwater depletion and the cumulative effects of fracking. Though not all the theories held water, they spoke to a growing public awareness of the complex interplay between human activity and the deep forces beneath our feet. The field of geology often moves slowly, tracking shifts that unfold over thousands or even millions of years. But Texas was now experiencing geological time compressed into days. Every hour brought new data. Strain readings from boreholes, satellite imagery showing subtle ground elevation changes, acoustic profiles revealing microfractures spreading underground. The sheer volume of information was both a challenge and a necessity. Real-time data was critical to understanding whether this was a localized anomaly or the opening chapter of a larger tectonic story. Texas, long viewed as a stable piece of the continental puzzle, was showing signs that it might be more geologically dynamic than once believed. Craton edges, long considered immovable, were now being reconsidered. Could Texas be experiencing the early signs of a major crustal shift, perhaps linked to the North American plate's internal stress redistribution? Or was this a more temporary episode, a release of built-up energy after years of hydrological manipulation and drilling? The truth remained buried deeper than even the largest cracks could reach. Whatever the cause, the event reshaped the way experts viewed the region. Geological models were rerun, risk maps were updated, monitoring stations were recalibrated for higher sensitivity, and the cracks themselves, gaping raw reminders of the Earth's capacity for surprise, remained under continuous watch. They were more than just breaks in the surface, they were questions carved into the land, demanding answers that could only be found by peeling back the layers of the planet itself. As the red alert remained in effect, researchers, planners, and residents alike found themselves caught between the present reality and the possibility of a deeper, more transformative shift. The land that had once seemed so firm and reliable was now a canvas of uncertainty, etched with the calligraphy of unseen forces. And as Texas watched the ground change beneath it, the rest of the country looked on, aware that when the Earth speaks this loudly, no place is immune to its message. While the initial wave of cracks sparked alarm, the days that followed revealed even more unsettling phenomena. In multiple locations, the ground began to exhibit slow, creeping displacement, a geological process known as lateral spreading. These movements were not as sudden or dramatic as the initial fissures, but they were just as dangerous in the long term. Subtle shifts in land elevation and horizontal stress patterns caused minor tilting of utility poles, warping of concrete slabs, and unusual tension in buried infrastructure. In certain rural sectors, telephone lines were pulled taut as their anchor points moved apart inch by inch, a silent testimony to the immense forces slowly unfolding below the surface. This subtle deformation proved especially concerning to geologists, as it indicated an ongoing redistribution of strain energy through the Earth's crust. Unlike an earthquake, which releases stress all at once, these slow-moving deformations suggested that the subsurface was actively reorganizing. Such patterns are rarely isolated. They often precede a period of increased seismic activity, even if tremors aren't immediately felt. Moreover, the deformation was observed in multiple regions, not just near the primary fissure zones, implying that the instability was broad and systemic, not limited to a localized fault rupture. The scale of the changes pushed researchers to consider geodynamic influences that reach far beyond Texas. Some scientists began exploring the possibility that the cracking was linked to deeper lithospheric adjustments happening beneath the central and eastern United States. Advanced geophysical models suggested that mantle flow beneath the North American plate, influenced by ancient subduction zones and large-scale convection currents, might be generating long-range intraplate stresses. Texas, situated on what had long been considered tectonically passive ground, could be responding to slow but persistent forces that originate hundreds of kilometers beneath the surface. At the same time, geomorphologists turned their attention to the region's ancient past. The cracks, they theorized, might be partially aligned with deeply buried rift systems dating back to the Precambrian era, ancient zones of weakness in the continental crust that had remained dormant for millions of years. These inherited structures, though buried beneath thick sediment layers, can sometimes reactivate under the right conditions. The Texas bedrock, once thought to be geologically simple, was revealing a far more complex tapestry of hidden faults and relic tectonic scars, all of which could respond to modern stresses in unpredictable ways. Meanwhile, the phenomenon began affecting groundwater behavior in measurable ways. Wells that had flowed steadily for decades suddenly dropped in pressure or began drawing in silt. In a few extreme cases, artesian wells, pressurized systems that naturally push water to the surface, began to surge and bubble with unusual intensity, discharging not only water but also faint clouds of subterranean gases. This pointed to a disturbing possibility that cracks in the earth were breaching aquitards, the protective clay or rock layers that shield deeper aquifers from contamination. If these barriers were compromised, the long-term sustainability of clean groundwater supplies across large swaths of Texas could be at risk. To understand the chemistry of the released gases and fluids, field teams deployed mobile geochemistry labs. What they discovered was complex. Along with elevated levels of radon and methane, Some samples contained trace minerals normally locked in deep geological formations, arsenic, barium, and strontium among them. These elements, in high concentrations, can be toxic, and their presence in groundwater required immediate scrutiny. While no health crises had emerged, environmental experts warned that the risk profile of Texas's aquifers had permanently shifted. The simple fact that buried mineral layers were now bleeding into water sources was enough to prompt immediate reassessments of regional water safety policies. Amid the natural dynamics, Texas's economic engine began to feel the tremors too. Agricultural operations, especially those dependent on ground stability, were hit with disruptions. Irrigation systems built on fixed pivot points began malfunctioning as the mechanical arms failed to align properly across uneven terrain. Fissures bisected some fields entirely, rendering large swaths of fertile land temporarily unusable. Livestock operations were also affected. In certain counties, cattle enclosures and grazing pastures were riddled with fractures deep enough to pose a danger to both animals and farm equipment. Ranchers had to relocate herds or construct temporary barriers to keep them from wandering into dangerous terrain. As pressure mounted, universities and private research institutions across the country began contributing to the investigation. Geological field schools dispatched teams of students and professors equipped with portable spectrometers, drones, and soil sensors. Their data added valuable nuance to the unfolding story. The mineral composition of the cracked zones differed from surrounding areas in key ways, suggesting possible subsurface intrusions or fluid migrations. In one location, magnetotelluric surveys revealed electrical conductivity anomalies beneath the surface, a potential sign of either saline fluid movement or previously unrecognized magmatic activity, both of which raised new questions about the depth and nature of the disturbances. To make matters even more complicated, atmospheric scientists started noticing a related anomaly: increased concentrations of certain trace gases above the affected regions. High-altitude monitoring balloons picked up faint but measurable upticks in helium-4 and hydrogen, gases often associated with deep Earth outgassing. These observations, while still preliminary, hinted that the crust might be thinning or opening microscopic conduits between the mantle and the surface. This was not a scenario typically associated with continental interiors, making the event all the more perplexing. Transportation infrastructure took another hit as rail networks encountered sudden misalignments. Freight trains traveling through affected zones reported increased vibration levels, triggering emergency inspections. Track gauges, which must remain precisely aligned for safety, showed signs of strain in multiple segments. Maintenance crews had to halt service in some areas, laying down temporary sections while full geotechnical assessments were conducted. The ripple effects cascaded into supply chains, particularly for industries dependent on just-in-time deliveries. Everything from lumber to automotive parts faced delays, further adding to the state's logistical burdens. Public schools, especially those in rural areas near expanding cracks, began shifting to remote instruction. Many of these schools sat on flat lands now susceptible to new fissures. Districts sent geotechnical teams to inspect foundations and determine which buildings remained safe for occupancy. In a few extreme cases, entire school campuses were vacated until further notice. Parents and educators alike faced a sobering reality. Their communities, long accustomed to a sense of geological calm, were now grappling with the unpredictability of a shifting Earth. The psychological toll of the event also began to manifest. Mental health services reported a spike in anxiety-related cases, especially among families living closest to the most active fissure zones. Children were particularly affected, often expressing fear that their homes might collapse or that the ground would open up while they slept. Social workers coordinated with local emergency management teams to offer counseling services and distribute educational materials about the nature of geological change, hoping to counteract the more sensational fears with grounded facts. At the center of all this remained a core scientific dilemma. What was truly driving the change, and could it be stopped or even predicted? Computational models evolved rapidly, incorporating the flood of new data from across disciplines. But even the most advanced simulations struggled to account for the pace of the developments. Some experts began advocating for the establishment of a permanent seismic and geodynamic research hub in Texas, equipped with deep borehole observatories and real-time GPS monitoring arrays. Such a facility, they argued, could serve not only as an early warning system, but also as a knowledge engine to decode the new behavior of the Texas crust. Efforts were also made to collaborate with international experts. Countries like Japan and Chile, long accustomed to managing ground deformation and seismic instability, offered technical insight into monitoring systems, land use adaptation, and crisis communication. Their experience in building resilient infrastructure proved invaluable, especially as Texas began reevaluating its own construction codes in light of recent events. Entire counties initiated reviews of zoning laws, building permit requirements, and emergency response strategies, moving away from assumptions of geologic immobility toward a model that acknowledged the region's newly revealed volatility. If you liked this video, please give it a like and subscribe to our channel. Also, leave your comments below and tell us, what are your thoughts on these Texas cracks? Will something big happen soon? We want to hear from you. Thank you for watching and see you next time.